I want to thank everyone for coming out to the first of a 4-part series of guest speakers coming to Fort Collins to talk about bicycle-friendly communities. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Brad Tucker. Brad, come on up here.
Thanks for having me here tonight. I came to cycling later in life. I was one of the millions of Americans that quit riding a bike when they get their driver's license and start driving a car. But pretty quickly as an adult, fell in love with bikes again. And I've been practicing law for 20 years now, all of it in the area of insurance and liability law, and have been able to merge something that I do professionally with something that I love and am very passionate about, which is bikes and cycling. I appreciate you having me here tonight. In Colorado, as a general rule, you're allowed to ride on the right side of the right lane of traffic in virtually all conditions. The state statute is a little bit different than your local ordinance in one respect, and that is, in the state statute, you as a cyclist are allowed to decide how far to the right feels safe to you. And your Fort Collins ordinance applies what's called a reasonableness standard. How far is reasonably safe? And the difference doesn't maybe sound that great at first blush, but it can be. And it's an important difference between state law and Fort Collins law. So I wanted to bring it up tonight. Under the state statute, you and you alone decide what's safe, and you have the right to make that judgment. You could potentially be second-guessed for that judgment under the municipal ordinance. Whenever you see the word reasonable or reasonableness in the law, basically, anybody know who decides that issue? Any guesses back there? The jury, that's exactly right. Are you an attorney or law student? It's a great guess if you're not. That's who decides. And if you're in front of a judge and not in a situation where there's a jury, then it would be the judge who decides. So you have the potential for being second-guessed. If you use good judgment, it'll be hard to be second-guessed, but there is that difference. The question is, other than what I just said, is there anything else about Larimer County that's different than state statute? And it's timely because Gael's actually working on a project for me right now comparing the ordinances for the major population centers in the state to the state statutes to see how they compare. And I think other than that standard, the reasonableness standard versus the cyclist's own discretion standard, that they're pretty much on point. There's one difference dealing with sidewalks, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But other than that, if you follow the state laws, you're pretty much good to go anywhere in Larimer County. And I'm guessing that might have something to do with two-abreast interpretation, or was that a bad guess?
Just want to know if there's anything weird going on.
Yeah. No, there's not. So, under any law, municipal or state, no cyclist is required to ride through anything hazardous. If there's debris in the roadway that would make it unsafe, glass, even a large amount of sand or dirt that would make you nervous on a 23 millimeter tire or whatever you're riding, you don't have to ride through it. You are allowed to move to the left, to make a left-hand turn, to get in, take the lane, and move to turn left. We'll talk a little bit more later about the 2 ways to legally make a left turn on a bike. To overtake a slower vehicle. And when you see the word vehicle, that means bikes, cars. In state statutes, anytime bikes are specifically defined as being vehicles. So any state statute that applies to vehicles applies to bikes. Now if it says motor vehicle, it doesn't, obviously. But bikes are vehicles under the law in Colorado. So if you're passing another cyclist, you're a very fast cyclist and you're passing a slow-moving car or tractor, you could do that. And on your one-way streets that you have, take the mirror reverse and apply it to the left-hand side of the road. So when you have multi-lane, one-way streets, you are allowed to ride on the far left side of the left lane, just as you would be to ride on the far right-hand side of the right lane on a divided street. The last point there on this slide has to do with dedicated right-hand turn lanes. And this is relatively new. This was the last time the primary statute on cycling was amended. It made it legal to use the left-hand side of a dedicated right-hand turn lane, even if you intend to go straight rather than turn right. Previously, it was technically illegal to be in that lane unless you were going to turn right. It's often the safer place to be. It gives you a greater margin for safety, and we convinced the legislature to make that amendment and make that change. This is a cyclist in Oregon who has done some self-help. I don't know if you can see how well you can see the slide. He's probably actually giving himself 5 feet, I think, if those are, that looks like 10-foot lumber. But we were very pleased to have the 3 feet to pass rule of thumb safety concept incorporated into the law. And in Colorado, drivers must give you a full 3 feet from the outermost part of the cyclist and the vehicle. Meaning, if there's side view mirrors that extend or a trailer with wheels that extend, it's whatever the furthest out portion of the passing vehicle is, measured from that point to the cyclist. And I get a lot of questions about this, and I remember when the law was passed and the opponents of it were, well, you know, who walks around with a tape measure or drives around with a tape measure? Or how are you ever going to know if it's really 3 feet? And do you expect us to start ticketing people who are 34 inches from a cyclist? You know, let's use a little common sense, right? I doubt very seriously, I know of no instance where any driver has been ticketed for being 34 inches from a cyclist when passing them. The purpose of this law was not to start writing a bunch of tickets. It was to educate people, educate cyclists, to educate motorists of what a fair, safe margin is. And you know, everybody knows what a yardstick looks like, what 3 feet looks like. And if you're on a bike, you know what it feels like when someone passes you at 3 feet, and you know what it feels like when they pass you at 3 inches. It feels a lot better at 3 feet. The question is to what extent drivers in Colorado are educated about their responsibility to give a cyclist 3 feet to pass. The answer I have is I hope so. It is the law. The extent to which any new driver is educated about what they need to be doing, it depends on what the driver schools are teaching. Is it on the particular written test that some new driver might take? I don't know. The big issue is education there, right? And so your local advocacy group, which is fantastic, you're lucky to have the statewide organization, Bicycle Colorado, which everybody in Colorado is lucky to have. Those groups are the best situated to educate motorists, whether it's through signs, through media, through events, anything that helps get that word out. Through T-shirts that say 3 feet to pass that your neighbor might ask you about and say, well, what does that mean? Any opportunity you have to spread that word, the better we all are. A 3 feet stick with what?
With a flag or a light at the end.
I was thinking, is it legal to put a 3 foot stick with a razor blade on the edge of it?
A key.
Yeah, a key. If you used to read Vela News or Bicycling Magazine, you've read probably Bob Mayansky's columns, and he's a friend of mine, and he actually took that photo on his cell phone and emailed it to me the day that he did that. And we had a conversation about the legality of, could you provide yourself with your own safety buffer? And then we got sidetracked with this new business idea that we had of selling these things that would attach to a bike rack that would have a flag and be fluorescent yellow. And it's a good question, and yes, it's absolutely legal to do. Let's stick with fluorescent yellow and the flag. I don't want to encourage the razor blade or the key, but you could probably do that. One question has to do with what can happen to somebody. What do you do if they almost run you off the road or they're too close? What should you do? What's your conduct?
That doesn't work in the Poudre Canyon.
Can you not get phone coverage? You may not be able to notify them immediately then, and that would provide you with nothing immediate. But one of the things you can do, how many of you knew about this, the STAR CSP program? Probably half. That's great. If you have a cell phone that doesn't have the letters on the numbers, log it into your pre-program so that you don't have to remember star 277, because I can never remember that. But I always remember star CSP. It's not a completely satisfying instant gratification thing that you can do, but it's something which is more than we had a few years ago. And especially in some of the canyon areas where there's potential for greater hostility between motorists, residents who live in the canyons, cyclists who enjoy the canyons, and kind of repeat offenders, if you will. This helps. It adds up. After 3 complaints, the vehicle owner receives a warning letter, and if they get one after that, then they... Yes, it does. No, I'm sympathetic. Okay, I mean, I'm someone who rides canyon roads all the time, and I'm not here to say that the STAR CSP program is perfect or that it solves instant problems. It is more than what we used to have before it was available, and if we don't use it and you don't make those complaints, then they definitely don't add up against somebody. But if someone lives in a canyon and they are confronting cyclists regularly, it won't take long for 3 complaints. You know, a visit at the house by a friendly Colorado State patrolman who gives them a stern lecture, you might think, well, that would work in grade school, but actually that's a pretty intimidating thing as an adult to have happen to you. The question was, do they really do it? Because a member of the audience was not pleased with the level of response that she got, and I'm sorry that happened to you. In my experience, Dan commented he's reported it twice and at least was told that they followed up on it. I've had good feedback from it. So might it depend on the dispatcher and the mood that they're in, or what county you're in, or who they refer you to and what that person's attitude is? Maybe, but again, it's a resource, it's a tool that we have, and rather, I would definitely suggest use the tool that we have, try to make that work for all of us. Because when you're calling, you're not just protecting yourself, you're protecting everybody here that enjoys that same road. What they really want to know is the license plate number more than anything, because that's how they can identify the owner. If you can give them the location and direction of travel, the vehicle and driver description in case there's the owner says, well, I loaned my truck to my neighbor, that wasn't me, and what they did. Cell phones that don't have, you can't make a phone call on them, but if you have a camera on it, are fantastic. It's actually, I've thought many times, to have it ready in camera mode to where you can just pull it out of your back pocket and snap a picture of a license plate. It would really be a good tool to have to kind of combat that aggressive and obnoxious behavior. The question was, can you track the complaint and find out what happened? And I'm assuming you were curious to know did they keep doing it? Yeah, I mean they're supposed to. We all have jobs and rely on everybody to do their job, right? So they're supposed to. The observation from the audience was he tried the STAR CSP number in his car, not on his bike, but with his family, and reported aggressive driving, and actually saw the law enforcement come out and pull the guy over and take him away. I'm not sure why he would have been taken away, other than that maybe he had done something.
He was most likely intoxicated.
There's another helpful star line that's star DUI that you can use the same way for suspected drunk drivers. I was talking about the purpose of the law was not to write a bunch of tickets, okay, but to educate. And there was another purpose of the law. And it's very important to us from kind of an after-the-fact consideration if we're in an accident. Because what used to happen if you were a cyclist and you were getting passed in an unsafe way and you get knocked over and thrown on the side of the road and left for dead, or maybe they stop, is you would say, I was hugging the white line, riding as far to the right as I could, and I got buzzed and knocked over, and now I'm broken into 4 pieces, and help. And so what was the response that we always heard if this ever happened? Thank you, that's it. From the audience, they swerved in front of me. So I don't know, but I doubt very many of you, when you're riding the road, sharing it with motor vehicles, have a death wish or suicidal or wanting to ride your bike into the path of a massive, fast-moving vehicle. But that is what was said over and over and over again. 3 feet would be quite a swerve. It really eliminates the risk that a cyclist who falls victim to an unsafe pass has to put up with the allegation that they were indeed the cause of their own injury for swerving into the path of a semi-truck. I actually tried a case in January where I represented a woman whose accident was at the time of the old law, before the 3 feet to pass, and she was hit by a tractor trailer, and by the trailer part of it, the rear wheels of the trailer, and the truck driver's defense, until I caught him in a lie, was that she, who is an experienced competitive bike racer, swerved her bike into the wheels of his trailer as he was passing her. Never mind the fact that there were 2 lanes that he had access to, and he couldn't have even changed lanes to pass her. She won and actually did quite well with the jury in the case. The jury was smart enough to not appreciate his conduct or his lie. We can ride 2 abreast in Colorado. It's fun to do that. I think a lot of people in the anti-bike crowd, which always mystifies me. I'm constantly amazed by the zeal of people who are anti-bike. But I think one of the things that really makes them mad is that a lot of times it looks like we're having fun. Because I never get the sense that they're having that much fun in their lives. But you're allowed to ride 2 abreast. The law says you should not impede the normal movement of traffic, and actually the normal and reasonable movement of traffic, I think, is the exact language. And people ask me at these types of events, what does that mean? And there again, it's probably an issue for a jury to decide or a judge to decide. But this is one of those areas of the law that I would really encourage you to use your common sense and err on the side of your own personal safety. That's why I say there, it's preferred that cyclists ride single file when a vehicle's attempting to pass. It'll just make the margin for error smaller, and it'll potentially make a friend for cyclists by the car that had an easier time getting around you. There are instances where, theoretically, if you're riding 2 abreast and there's not room for a car to pass one cyclist safely by sharing the lane, say you're going through a construction zone or something like that, technically you could probably ride 2 abreast through that and impede the traffic anyway. But a lot of what's legal and what should you really be doing as a cyclist out on the road, they don't always line up 100%. And I want to speak to that a little bit. I think as cyclists, we so often feel that society or the law treats us like second-class citizens, or we feel kind of marginalized with our rights, that when we get a law passed like this that affords us a right, that we get excited about it and we think, now this is a right and we get to do this and I am going to do this. I'm going to do it every time, and if I don't take full advantage of this right, they might take that right away from me. And I think it's only natural when when you feel marginalized that you want to cling to that. But no one's going to take that right away from you by being an ambassador for the sport, making a friend instead of an enemy on the road, and doing something that makes life easier for everybody. If you're climbing, and depending on how fit you are, you're going somewhere between 4 and 15 miles an hour up a steep hill. It just doesn't take that long to single up, let that car get around you, then go back side by side and visit with your friend and have a great time on your ride. So a lot of this tonight is about what your rights are. I fight for those rights, whether it's with legislators trying to get laws changed, or whether it's in a courtroom trying to represent somebody who's been a victim of an accident. But just because you always have the right doesn't always mean it's what you should be doing. Think about that. At least give that idea some practical application. Yeah, it's a good question, and it has to do with the safety considerations of riding 20 people in a double line as opposed to 20 people in a single line. And there are absolutely situations where what you're talking about, 10 deep of 2 abreast, is the safest way to ride. I can tell you, in my experience of representing what's now probably been hundreds of people who've been in bike accidents, that almost never do these serious injury accidents happen in large groups. The reason, I believe, is because of visibility. Because the thing that I see on the police report over and over and over again when my client gets left turned, or my client gets doored, or my client gets right hooked, or any other number of things that happen to us out on the road, is that the driver says, I never saw him. And well, why not is usually my first question. But there's definitely safety in numbers. So if you can ride doubled up and there's plenty of room for cars to pass and get around you, you're on long stretches of county, go for it. That's how I like to ride. It's fun. I think it's compact. It teaches good riding skills if you're out training with your racing buddies or your team. And it makes you visible. And I think your argument of that is safer than 20 singled up, I think there's something to that. Now, if you get yourself in a situation where you're impeding traffic, then, single up. I think what you're probably alluding to is, was it 2 summers ago? What happened was 1412 Section 6 used to be worded differently. Okay, so last August it was amended. Under the old law, there was room for interpretation about whether you could ride 2 abreast if there was a shoulder on the road, and it was an intellectually honest interpretation of a statute that was never intended to say that. So it was changed last August to make very, very clear that cyclists can ride 2 abreast in the road if they're not interfering with the normal and reasonable flow of traffic. And if you get a ticket for that, I'd fight it. The question is, what is impeding traffic, and where does it become silliness and where does it become actually impeding traffic? If somebody has to take their foot off the accelerator to slow down 3 miles an hour, are you impeding them? If they have to, heaven forbid, touch their brake and wait for you to go around the corner before they can safely pass you, and you've delayed them anywhere between 4 to 6 seconds in their journey, maybe, depending on the light cycle of the next intersection they hit, are you impeding them? Well, and you can probably tell by my sarcasm, I don't think so. And I don't think that reasonable minds would think that. If you were dealing with someone who was anti-bike and had an anti-bike agenda and was using anti-bike ideas to be divisive in a community and to embolden what that individual perceived to be his constituency, then you might get a different interpretation from that person. But I don't think that's reasonable, and I don't think it would hold up in court, and I'd fight it. I think the new statute is very clear on it. I know exactly what you're talking about, and I was involved in trying to change the language the last go round in August to try to take that loophole out of the statute. The question is, if you're in a double line that's basically working as a pace line, isn't the left side, assuming the left side's going to be the fast side, aren't they? I guess it would depend on which way the wind's blowing too, but aren't they passing slower vehicles? Aren't they riding within the law? I would say if they're riding within the law if they're riding the same speed and nobody's passing anybody. I mean, I think, start with this proposition. You can ride two abreast in the lane of traffic always, unless you're impeding the normal and reasonable flow of traffic. If you're out, in a rural area, enjoying a ride, a group ride, and you're riding two abreast, not 3, 4, 5 abreast, okay? But you're riding two abreast, and you're not slowing any car, unreasonably stacking up traffic behind you, you're fine. So you don't even need to go to that next, step of, you're passing. The question has to do with the application of a statute that deals with defining impeding traffic for motor vehicles. The reason it's not directly applicable is because that statute says motor vehicle. And earlier on I was saying if it says vehicle, it covers bikes. One of the things we've talked about trying to do legislatively is to change that to say vehicle, because it's not really any different than, the thing I think about, and you drive around in Colorado, you've got people pulling campers and slow-moving RVs going over mountain passes, and if the speed limit's 50 miles an hour and someone can only go 20, once cars stack up, they have to move over. Well, that's pretty obviously impeding traffic. And what we're trying to do is kind of use those same common sense ideas. By and large, I think, let me say this too about law enforcement before I go much further, all right? My kindergarten teacher told me that the police are my friends. And you know what, all Snickers and snide remarks aside, I believe that. And I think that most law enforcement officers in this state work hard, and more than anything, they're concerned about safety. Are they always as educated as they should be on the law, on the issues, on bike laws in particular? No. And I can tell you that one of the big projects statewide that's happening with Bicycle Colorado is that big efforts to educate law enforcement are taking place, are happening right now. There's a curriculum that's being developed, and I was just told by Scott Christopher at Bicycle Colorado that as far as the Colorado State Patrol go, they are now going to have bicycle law and bicycle safety as part of the mandatory curriculum for training of Colorado State Patrol. And what we want is for that to extend to county sheriffs, to police departments, because when they become informed, then they don't make mistakes that just aggravate us and make us feel like we don't matter because they haven't gone to the trouble of learning the laws that affect us when we're on our bikes. It's a good question, though, about we try to use that as an analogy to say that, tapping your brake is not impeding traffic. The question is, can you ride a two abreast echelon, which really isn't much of an echelon anyway, is it? I would say that you would have a hard time justifying being out that far into the lane based on safety. The question has to do with the legality of riding two abreast at a diagonal in an echelon formation.
Or even single file.
Okay. With an echelon, I don't know if does everybody know what an echelon is generally? I mean, you ride in a diagonal pace line to try to shield people from crosswinds. And it's not that effective with two people. You would agree. But if you are going to have two people, there's no purpose of being really out in the center of the lane as opposed to the right. Wherever you are, left to right within the lane, the same drafting benefit is going to...
My question was more towards larger groups.
Well, that's if you're in a race and you're echeloning in crosswinds and you're using it tactically, you probably have 5 or 6 people lined up across. And when is it legal to ride more than 2 abreast?
Is it abreast?
I would.
That's the thing. Or
Yeah.
is it a straight line that just happens to not be in line with the flow of traffic? Like you could argue that it's single file. It's just
You could argue that, and my opinion is that would be a losing argument.
Okay. Just wanted to know.
Yeah. Anybody know when you can ride more than 2 abreast? Answer from Mr. Echelon was in a bike lane, and he's absolutely correct.
I read the pamphlet.
Well, good for you. I see that it actually is right up there on the screen, too. So those of you who aren't sleeping right now have seen that. The question from the audience is, if you're riding with the pace of traffic, could you go more than 2 abreast in the lane? My opinion is that's probably safe, probably wouldn't irritate motorists, and probably not legal. Because the law is very clear, you cannot ride more than 2 abreast in the lane. As long as you're in a race that has a rolling enclosure where you have an agreement with your law enforcement and your permitting body that you don't have to yield to traffic, yes, or if you're in a closed road situation. But for there's a lot of racers in the crowd, I can tell, and you know that if you're in a road race, if you get dropped, then you're kind of on your own and you have to abide by the rules of the road. Those are because usually the best that we hope for in Colorado is a rolling enclosure. Other than some Mount Evans hill climb, I struggle to think of any closed road race that we have. So you have these rolling enclosures where you can echelon, where you can take the whole lane, where you can really ride it and race it the way that you want to. Did I answer? If you're within the rolling enclosure or you're on a closed road, yeah, you can race the lane. And if anybody's racing this year, you know the zero tolerance on yellow line violations that the race officials are having, and it's for safety considerations and to not jeopardize future years permitting. If you get dropped out of that rolling enclosure, then you have to share the road with the cars, and these rules apply. Are you asking that from a promoter liability standpoint or a racer, what should I be doing? Yeah, if you're within a rolling enclosure or you're on a closed course, you get the whole lane. If you're outside, if it's not a closed course, and you're outside the rolling enclosure, these rules apply. No, it's a good question. If the rolling enclosure is caused by private vehicles rather than law enforcement, is it the kind of rolling enclosure you can rely on as a racer to not feel like you're breaking these laws if you're using the whole lane? I think yes. I've never heard of an instance where a cyclist was ticketed under that circumstance. The question is, if you're on a long, straight, wide open road separated by a dotted line, 1 lane each direction, and you're riding 2 abreast, and a car comes up from behind you, are you impeding, or do they have to just take the room that they're allowed and offered there and go around you, and it's the latter. You're not impeding them. They can go around you. And this is important too. This last go-round in August of '09, we made it legal for cars to pass on a, partially over a double yellow to get around a cyclist. I think a lot of motorists don't know that. There's an educational component that needs to come from that. But you can legally cross a double yellow in a car to pass somebody on a bike if there's safe distance ahead. Passing a slow-moving cyclist in a fast-moving car requires a lot less time and distance than just trying to pass somebody that's going 10 miles an hour slower than you. So common sense took over, and they said, hey, let's clarify that cars can do this to pass. So even in a double yellow situation, if you're not impeding the car, you'd be legal for being doubled up. Now, if there's a double yellow, it probably has to do with visibility, curvy, maybe it's in a canyon. And there's an example where I'd say, legal or not, just single up briefly. The question has to do with the interplay between a municipal ordinance and a state statute and what controls. And if the local ordinance is silent on the subject, does the state law apply? And the answer is yes. These state statutes and state rules of the road apply everywhere in the state unless the local governmental authority does something to change it. Question? Well, you should tell whoever. The comment from the audience was that there are apparently four candidates running for sheriff, and he had the occasion to interview them all, which sounds interesting. I'd love to hear about that. But one of the candidates told the member of the audience that it is never legal for a car to cross a double yellow to pass a cyclist, and I'm sorry, that's just not correct. So if you do want to challenge them with the correct information, if you'll shoot me an email, I'll cut and paste the statutory site and send it to you so that you can be armed with information when you talk to them again. Yeah, absolutely. It's part of the educational process, and I don't think that candidate said that to be antagonistic. I mean, maybe they did. That'd be pretty stupid, but they were probably just ill-informed. And that's one of the challenges that we have, is to make sure that law enforcement are educated. The signal law changed in the past couple of years, and you do need to signal. You're supposed to, at least at some point, stick your arm out to tell traffic what you're doing. You don't have to do it continuously if it's not safe. Either it's windy or the road's bumpy, or if you need both hands on the handlebar, the law allows you to make your signal and get your hands back on the handlebar. Left turn, very obvious, left arm out to the side. Right turn can be done one of two ways. You can either do it with your right arm out to the side, or the old-fashioned way that we all learned, stick your left arm out at a 90-degree angle. And let me tell you a little anecdote about this, because this is important. There's an expression that all politics are local. And what I've always thought that meant is that if it affects you, then it's important, and if it doesn't, then maybe it's not. When we tried to get the law used to be that you could not legally signal a right turn like I'm doing right now with your right arm out to the side, which is, of course, very obvious and common sense about what you're intending to do, and sends a very clear message to anybody that you're going that way, right? But when we tried to say you could do it that way or this way, we had serious opposition to changing the law. Anybody want to guess who didn't like it? Motorcyclists didn't like it. And it's because if you've ever ridden a motorcycle, the throttle's on the right-hand side, and they can't signal a right-hand turn with the right hand. And so their concern was that if motorists got used to seeing people on bikes signal with their right arm, that everybody would forget what this meant and that it might jeopardize their safety. So, I disagreed with that, and ultimately we prevailed on changing the law, and I think common sense applied, but that's just an example of how other groups who aren't cyclists will try to rally their resources when it comes to lawmaking to get what they want. And so if you're not supporting Bike Fort Collins and Bicycle Colorado to make sure that they're doing that for you, for what you want, you need to do that. Because that's who's speaking for you when it comes to these lawmaking decisions. Right way to make a left turn. You put your arms in the drops and go as fast as you can, right? And there's two ways to do it legally. You can do it like a car, which is take the lane, go to the left side, signal your intent to turn left, and do it just like a car would. Or you can do it like a pedestrian, which is stay on the right-hand side of the right lane, cross the road, stop, wait, and do the same thing again, going the other way. They're both completely legal. Sidewalk protocol. The question is, how soon can you get over into the left-hand lane? And my memory is it's 100 yards. It's a pretty good distance. It's set forth in the. You can't do it half a mile down the road, but there's a long, reasonable amount of space that you're given. If there is a dedicated left turn lane, where are you supposed to be within that lane? I think you could probably be anywhere in that lane if you were trying to turn left. What I try to do, and I think the best practice, is to be on the right-hand side and then take the turn wide so that if a car wants to go faster and take the inside aspect of the turn, they can. The question from the audience has to do with the fighting a ticket that you feel like should not have been written, and the decision that you have to make as a cyclist as to whether or not you want to fight for what you think is the right result or just pay the fine. And it's a personal decision. If you get a ticket for doing something that you think is perfectly safe, appropriate, and completely legal, but you decide that it's not important enough or you don't want to spend your time fighting it, that's your decision to make. What I would urge you to do, and I'm not talking about something that's going to put you in prison. I don't think you need to hire an attorney to do it. You think you get ticketed incorrectly? I would encourage you to fight it because, prosecutors don't like prosecuting cases that shouldn't be filed, and the word gets back to law enforcement that they're incorrectly applying the law. A nonsense ticket for a traffic citation, you're usually going to be, it's going to say pay the fine or appear in court by such and such a date. That's usually going to be in about 30 days. You show up and you say, not guilty, and they'll either try it right then and there or they'll set it for hearing. They'll usually set it for hearing. And you just make your arguments. And if you're ever in that situation, what you say to the judge is, show up, be respectful of the court, be very fact-based and fact-oriented, be prepared to talk about what the law says and what you did and why what you did was not inconsistent with that law. And, I believe in our system. I work within our system, and I think our system works. But you have to work within the system to make it work for you. Or you can just send them a check for $50 and not deal with it. And look, people are busy. I understand that. Not everybody's going to fight every ticket that shouldn't have been written. But I think, by and large, when we do that, it's better for all of us. So there's our sidewalk photo. I don't think that's here in Fort Collins. You can ride on sidewalks in Fort Collins except in the downtown area. You all are probably very familiar with that. Even when you can ride on a sidewalk, from a safety standpoint, I would say, unless it's at the very beginning or the very end of your journey, it's probably not the safest or best place for you to be. I think bikes belong on the road. That's They have every right to the road. They ought to be using the road. It's where people expect to see them, and you'll generally be safer on the road than on a sidewalk, and probably have less of a chance of being in an accident with a car coming out of a driveway. If you are going to ride on a sidewalk, you have to basically follow all the rules that a pedestrian would be asked to follow. When you are riding on a sidewalk and in a lot of places on bike paths that motor vehicles are not allowed on, the law does require you to say on your left or passing or let people know. And that's just courteous too. That's one of those little things that we can do to be ambassadors of our sport that goes a long way to make friends out there. The question has to do with speed limits on sidewalks where riding on the sidewalk is allowed. A lot of, that's usually going to be a municipal law if there is one. Boulder has, it used to be where you could not ride a bike on a sidewalk or through a crosswalk in Boulder, but now they've changed it and you can, but you cannot do it at a speed greater than a pedestrian would be. So you don't have to dismount and walk your bike across the crosswalk, but you have to ride it at a slow speed that is about what a pedestrian would be doing it at. And it's, I understand why that, the idea is that cars are going to be expecting things coming and going at about that speed, and you know, you don't have the, that bike came out of nowhere comments from cars who aren't expecting 15 to 20 mile an hour movement within a crosswalk. I'm a big fan of riding bikes on the road. I am not a big fan of riding them on a sidewalk or in crosswalks. If you find yourself in a situation where you're needing to use them, that's the way to do it. Yeah, DK? That happens all over the place. And this is the, try to imagine that the sidewalk is adjacent to an eastbound lane and somebody's going westbound on the sidewalk. And what happens is that when a car is pulling from a private driveway, parking lot, whatever, and they want to turn right, they don't look to the right. They only look to the left because they're looking for oncoming traffic. And they float forward without ever looking to the right because they're not concerned about traffic coming from the right. They're going to turn right and go right into that traffic. So when you're on a sidewalk going opposite the direction of the adjacent lane of traffic, if it's legal for you to be on that sidewalk, pretend that you are completely invisible while you're riding, because the chance is very, very good that any car that comes up from a driveway is going to move forward into your path without ever looking at you. It's just another example of how dicey that can be. So I won't get too much into the technical illumination requirements, but you know, sun's down right now. If you rode a bike here and you plan on riding your bike home, I hope you have lights and reflectors. If you don't, you're definitely not legal and probably not being very safe. And this really, you know, a lot of this stuff on safety is really to try to keep you safe and to keep you out of accidents. And it's also a problem for cyclists who fall victim to accidents. If you're not doing everything right and you get hit and injured, your conduct that wasn't right or legal is going to serve as a defense, you know, to somebody who hit you. So protect yourself both from a safety standpoint and from a rights standpoint. If you should fall victim, you know, to somebody else's carelessness, by doing things the right way so that you don't face the argument of having to take partial responsibility for what happened to you. Anybody go back to that? Yeah, that's right. Everybody that knows about the case in California knows that's the doctor's car. I can't think of his last name right now, but this is the guy that passed the cyclist and stopped short and caused cyclists to rear end. I actually represented, there's a woman who runs like Douglas County that was on a tandem, with her husband, and some angry guy coming down Deer Creek Canyon in the Denver area did this to them. He was prosecuted criminally. The guy that injured my client was prosecuted criminally and then paid a pretty sizable civil judgment for the damages. She's a nurse, and she broke one wrist and badly sprained the other. Couldn't work for 3 months. The question from the audience is talking about, under the law in a rear-end accident, isn't the person who hits from behind at fault? And the answer is no. There is what's called a presumption of negligence, but it's a rebuttable presumption, meaning that if you can present facts to show why that person who hit from behind should not be presumed negligent, then they're not negligent as a matter of law. And I'll take the case of a cyclist who has that happen to them any day, and we'll win that case, because that's just nothing but obnoxious, aggressive behavior, and nobody appreciates it. And you're not defenseless in that. Question?
Yeah, what about drafting a vehicle?
Does the person you're drafting know that, are they cooperating, or are they innocent to it? I think it's borderline as to whether or not you can motor pace legally with a coach or somebody that really knows what they're doing.
What about drafting off somebody you don't know?
Don't do it. It's arguably following too closely, and if you find yourself in an accident with that car, you'll have a very tough time blaming the car, and might find yourself responsible for the damage that you've done to the car. We have criminal statutes that provide for prosecution on this 3 feet to pass if you get buzzed and run off the road. If you're with friends and somebody buzzes you and you have to take it to the ditch because you're not comfortable with the 3 inches that they're giving you, and you report them and you've got witnesses, they should prosecute that. Anybody been hit with a missile on their bike? Missile under the law means anything: a cup of ice, an empty fast food bag, anything that they throw at you, and they can be it's a class 2 misdemeanor to throw anything at or against a cyclist. Talked about get involved. This was from the Black Hawk protest at the Capitol about a week ago. We've already had some mention of an upcoming election. You have more power than you can imagine, all right? But only when you are organized and are making your voice known. And if you're not doing that and you don't like what happens, then don't blame anybody but yourself. You have a very involved local bike advocacy group in Fort Collins, one of the best in the country. You have what I think is the best state advocacy organization in Bicycle Colorado. If you don't use the resources that you have to make sure that elected officials understand that you pay taxes, that you vote, that you register cars even though that you're on a bike, that you do things that are important to them as an elected official, if you don't let them know that and let them know what's important to you, then they're going to listen to somebody else that's taking the time to make their voice heard, like the motorcyclist that didn't like the right-hand turn, okay? So get involved and participate in advocacy with your time and, hopefully a couple of bucks here and there. You've got a lot of cyclists here in Fort Collins at CSU, and I would encourage you to use those resources. Those people are voting age people, and if they're registered to vote here, they can make a difference. Most elections at the local level are not won and lost by big numbers. They're won and lost by relatively small numbers, and it's the most organized people that win. That's all I had on my slides. There's a question from the audience? Brad@colobikelaw.com, and that's on there. If you have questions about anything bike law related, don't hesitate to call me or email me. If I'm in trial or I'm on vacation, I might not be back to you within a couple of hours, but I return all my calls, I return all my emails. You'll hear from me. I get this one all the time. Cyclist training with headphones, earbuds. And then he said, I know it's against the law. It's against the law to wear them in a car. But it is not against the law to wear them on a bike. Yes. Is it a good idea? I had a mom email me last week and said, please tell me that this is illegal. My teenage daughter insists on wearing her earphones when she rides, and I'm worried about her safety. So, are there circumstances where you're not really compromising your safety by listening to music at a reasonable volume? Yes, absolutely, okay? So, make your own personal decision, okay? Do what feels safe to you. You don't have to wear a helmet either, okay? I'd wear one. Okay, a lot of this has to do with the after the bad thing has happened scenario, okay? If you're a victim of an accident, do you want to face an argument by the defense that you weren't using the full benefit of all of your senses because you were being distracted by some rock and roll music, and I say that facetiously, but you ought to see the average age of a jury, When I represent victims in bike accident cases, okay, there's a lot of people out there that have an anti-bike bias. There are a lot of people out there that we don't want as a juror on that case, right? So the fewer obstacles I have to overcome for my clients, the better.
What are our legal requirements requiring carrying identification while out riding on the bike?
You are required to give identification to a police officer who asks for it. I think depending on what you've done and your attitude and your conduct with that police officer, that's largely going to dictate that officer's attitude, to you and what they're going to require. Unless I'm commuting to or from work, I usually don't have my driver's license on me. If I'm out training, I usually don't have my driver's license. If a cop pulled me over and wanted my identification, I'd have to say, I'm sorry, I don't have it. Here's my cell phone. You can kind of tell who I am that way. I apologize, I don't train with my driver's license, and hopefully I'd be able to finesse myself out of the situation. And I might get a ticket for failing to show a driver's license to a police officer that they would probably wind up throwing out. Just make a photocopy of your driver's license and stick it in your tool bag or your spare tire bag on your bike, and just leave it in there. I'm a big fan of those road IDs, by the way. I have clients that come to me not knowing how they even got injured, and no witnesses, and so it's really safe and smart. You guys have been great. You've had great questions, and I appreciate it. Thank you.